30 candles flickered on my custom cake, illuminating the smiling faces of everyone I loved. But the brightest smiles belonged to my husband and my best friend. They stood shoulder to shoulder, raising their glasses to my happiness. I didn't know then that the faint scent of gardenias lingering in the air wasn't from my birthday bouquet. It was the scent of my ruined marriage. The bass from the string quartet's modern covers thrummed through the floorboards of the Ivory Tower penthouse, a subtle vibration against the soles of my designer heels. It was my 30th birthday. The room was a sea of silk, champagne, and strategically placed floral arrangements, a masterpiece orchestrated entirely by my husband, Julian, and my best friend, Vanessa. From my vantage point near the floor-to-ceiling windows, and overlooking the glittering city skyline, everything looked perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. "Maya, darling, you look absolutely ethereal," a senior executive from Ashford Media Group cooed, pressing an air kiss to my cheek. I smiled, flashing the practiced, polished curve of my lips that I usually reserved for high-stakes client pitches. "Thank you, Richard. Enjoy the caviar." As he drifted away into the sea of socialites, my eyes sought out the anchors of my life. Julian was across the room, leaning casually against the marble bar. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair catching the ambient light as he laughed at something a guest said. And there, standing just a fraction too close to him, was Vanessa. Vanessa. We had shared cramped dorm rooms, brutal heartbreaks, and countless bottles of cheap wine before we ever knew what luxury tasted like. Tonight, she was wearing a stunning emerald gown that clung to her curves, a stark, beautiful contrast to my understated silver silk. Standing next to Julian, they looked like an editorial spread for a luxury lifestyle magazine. A strange, cold prickle crawled up the back of my neck. I watched as Julian leaned down to hear her over the music. His hand brushed the small of her back. It was a fleeting, microscopic gesture, one a stranger wouldn't even register. But I wasn't a stranger. I was his wife of 5 years. I knew the heavy, possessive warmth of that exact touch. "Don't be paranoid," I chided myself, gripping the delicate stem of my champagne flute until my knuckles turned white. "They're just close. They've always been close." And she helped him plan this entire night. I took a slow, deep breath, consciously forcing the tension to drain from my shoulders, and began weaving through the elegant crowd toward them. I needed the reassurance of his arm around my waist, the grounding, familiar scent of his cedarwood cologne. "There's the birthday girl," Julian said smoothly as I approached, his eyes lighting up with what looked like pure adoration. He reached out, pulling me seamlessly against his side. The gesture was flawless. "Having fun?" Vanessa asked, her smile bright, perhaps a millimeter too wide. Her eyes, usually so warm and open with me, darted away from mine for a split second before meeting my gaze again. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "Thank you both. Really, you outdid yourselves." "Only the best for you, Maya," Julian murmured, and in turning his head to press a tender kiss to my temple. As he leaned in, my senses went on high alert. Beneath the crisp, clean scent of his expensive cologne, there was something else, a heavy, sweet, intoxicating floral note, gardenia, laced with a faint hint of vanilla. My breath caught sharply in my throat. It was Vanessa's signature perfume. The custom blend she had ordered from a niche boutique in Paris, the one she jokingly claimed was her absolute secret weapon. Why was her secret weapon lingering so heavily on the collar of my husband's shirt? "Maya, you okay?" "You look a bit pale," Vanessa asked, her manicured hand reaching out to gently touch my bare arm. I stared at her hand, then slowly looked up at her face, feigning a look of maternal concern. The world seemed to slow down. The ambient noise of the party, the clinking of crystal, the laughter, it all dulled into a low, rushing roar in my ears. The air suddenly felt too thick, too heavy to breathe. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice sounding incredibly hollow to my own ears. "Just a little overwhelmed. It's a lot of people." "Take a breath, sweetheart," Julian said, his thumb stroking my waist. The touch that usually brought me immense comfort now felt like a branding iron burning straight through the silk of my dress. I nodded, gently but firmly stepping out of his embrace. I think I just need a minute in the powder room to touch up my lipstick. I turned away before either of them could see the terrifying clarity dawning in my eyes. The puzzle pieces I had subconsciously ignored for months were suddenly assembling themselves with agonizing speed. The late nights at the office, and the hushed, abruptly ended phone calls, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I walked away from the dazzling lights, the beautiful music, and the perfect lie of my life, my heart pounding a frantic, devastating rhythm against my ribs. The click of the powder room door locking sounded like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. I leaned heavily against the cool mahogany, closing my eyes as the muffled bass of the string quartet continued to pulse through the floorboards. The Ivory Tower penthouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully gilded cage, shrinking rapidly around me. I walked over to the marble vanity, bracing my trembling hands on either side of the gold-rimmed sink. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked exactly as she had 5 minutes ago. Flawless makeup, and perfectly pinned dark hair, a serene expression. But beneath the diamond necklace resting against my collarbone, my heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. Gardenia. I turned the heavy gold faucet, letting the freezing water rush over my wrists, praying the sudden chill would shock my system back to reality. It was just perfume, I told my reflection fiercely. Vanessa was wearing it. She had hugged Julian when he arrived from the office. They had been coordinating the caterers, the florists, the lighting all afternoon. Of course, her scent would transfer. It was a simple, logical explanation. A transfer of fabric, a lingering floral note in a crowded, warm room. But my mind, trained to dissect PR crises and read between the lines of carefully crafted corporate statements at Ashford Media Group, refused to swallow the surface-level excuse. The scent hadn't just been lingering on his tuxedo jacket lapel. It had been woven deeply into the crisp white collar of his shirt, right against the warm skin of his neck. The kind of intimacy that required pressed bodies, hidden faces, and stolen moments. I closed my eyes, and a sudden, sickening montage played in my mind. Vanessa brushing off my recent complaints about Julian's late nights at the office. "He's just securing that VP spot for your future, May," she had said 2 weeks ago, sipping her wine with that perfect, reassuring smile. Julian's phone constantly placed face down on the kitchen island, the subtle, silent communication passing between them when they thought I was focused on the menu. I grabbed a linen guest towel, drying my hands with slow, deliberate precision to mask the shaking. I was Maya Lin. I did not succumb to baseless, hysterical paranoia. If I walked out there and accused my husband and my best friend of an affair based on a phantom floral note, the scandal would be whispered about in the Ashford break rooms for years. Observe, I commanded my reflection. Just observe. Control the narrative. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I reapplied a sheer coat of gloss, smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my silver silk dress, and unlocked the door. The wall of sound and light hit me instantly as I stepped back into the main hall. The party had shifted gears. The quartet was playing something slightly more upbeat, and waiters were circulating with a fresh round of champagne. I pasted on my practiced smile, ready to find Julian, ready to slip my hand into his and test the waters. I needed to look into his eyes, not as an adoring wife, but as a silent interrogator. I scanned the marble bar where I had left them. Empty. Only a few discarded cocktail napkins and a half-empty martini glass remained. My gaze swept over the velvet lounges, the balcony doors, the clusters of laughing executives. I saw Richard from marketing. I saw Julian's pretentious cousin by the ice sculpture, but I didn't see the tailored lines of Julian's tuxedo, and I didn't see the striking emerald green of Vanessa's gown. A cold weight dropped into my stomach, heavy and absolute. One of them stepping away to take a call was normal. Both of them vanishing from the center of my party simultaneously, that wasn't a coincidence. That was a pattern. And in my world, now patterns always led to the truth. The penthouse, spanning 4,000 square feet, suddenly felt like a labyrinth designed to mock me. I stood near the edge of the living room, my champagne flute resting untouched on a passing waiter's tray. The air, heavy with expensive perfumes and the scent of roasted duck canapes, tasted like ash in my mouth. "Maya, your speech later. We need you to mention the new merger subtly," whispered Elise, the sharp-featured PR director of Ashford Media, suddenly appearing at my elbow. I blinked, forcing my focus to shift from the empty spot by the bar to her expectant face. "Of course, Elise. I have it handled." My voice was a perfectly calibrated instrument, betraying none of the glacial terror expanding in my chest. "Excellent. And Julian was just saying earlier how invaluable your touch is to the optics of the firm. You two are the golden couple." She squeezed my arm affectionately before melting back into the crowd. The golden couple. The phrase echoed in my mind, hollow and mocking. I began to walk. My steps were deliberate, measured to the tempo of the jazz band. To anyone watching, I was the gracious hostess mingling with her guests. In reality, I was hunting. I checked the sprawling terrace overlooking the city lights. Nothing. I passed by the gourmet kitchen, where the catering staff was buzzing like bees. Nothing. With every room I cleared, the invisible hand squeezing my lungs tightened its grip. There was only one wing of the penthouse left: the private quarters, the master bedroom, the guest suites, and Julian's study. I turned away from the vibrant and chaotic heart of the party and slipped into the long, dimly lit corridor that led to the back of the apartment. The transition was jarring. The thick, plush carpet swallowed the sharp clicks of my heels, and the pulsing bass of the music faded into a dull, distant thud. It felt like stepping out of a vibrant dream into a cold, suffocating vacuum. The hallway was lined with black and white photographs Vanessa had taken on our trips. There was one of Julian and me in Tuscany, laughing over a plate of pasta. Another of Vanessa and me on a yacht, our hair whipping in the wind. The faces in the frames seemed to stare down at me with silent, condescending pity. I passed the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but the pristine, untouched duvet and the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Empty. I kept moving. And at the very end of the corridor stood the heavy oak double doors of Julian's private study. It was a room strictly off-limits during parties, a sanctuary of leather-bound books, crystal decanters, and confidential Ashford files. A sliver of golden light spilled from beneath the gap of the right door. I stopped. The silence in the corridor was absolute, broken only by the frantic, deafening rush of blood in my own ears. I didn't want to take another step. My rational mind, the part of me that loved my pristine, perfect life, screamed at me to turn around. Go back to the music. Go back to the champagne. Drink until the gardenia scent is just a bad memory. But a darker, more primitive instinct pushed me forward. The need to know, the absolute necessity of the truth, dragged my feet across the remaining distance. I stood before the heavy oak door, and then I heard it. A soft, breathless sound. A muffled laugh that belonged to a woman who had shared my secrets for 15 years. I reached out, my trembling fingers grazing the cold brass of the doorknob. The brass doorknob was ice cold against my burning palm. I didn't turn it. The heavy oak door was already slightly ajar, left open by a fraction of an inch. A careless mistake by two people who thought they were untouchable in their own private kingdom. I held my breath, the air trapped in my lungs burning like acid, and leaned closer to the narrow slit of light. The study was bathed in the amber glow of the single desk lamp. The faint, rich aroma of aged bourbon mingled with that inescapable, sickeningly sweet scent of gardenia. My eyes adjusted to the shadows, and the world simply stopped spinning. Julian was leaning back against the edge of his mahogany desk, the desk where he had signed the lease for this very penthouse, the desk where we had toasted to our future just hours after our wedding. His tuxedo jacket was discarded on the floor. His crisp white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. Standing directly between his parted knees was Vanessa. Her emerald gown was bunched up in his fists, his hands gripping her waist with a desperate, familiar hunger that I hadn't felt directed at me in over a year. She was tracing the line of his jaw with a delicate, manicured finger, leaning down to press her lips to the hollow of his neck, the exact spot where I had smelled her perfume earlier. "We can't stay in here long," Julian murmured, his voice thick and low, vibrating with a rough urgency that shattered the last fragments of my denial. "Maya is going to look for us before the cake cutting." Vanessa let out a soft, throaty laugh. It was the same laugh she used when we shared inside jokes over brunch, the laugh I had always found so comforting. Now it sounded like the scraping of a blade against bone. "Let her look," she whispered, tangling her fingers into his dark hair. "She's too busy playing the perfect Ashford hostess to notice anything. She never notices, Julian." He pulled her down for a kiss, entirely consuming her mouth. I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I didn't burst through the door and demand explanations. The cinematic cliches of betrayal I had seen in movies felt entirely inadequate for the profound, suffocating violence of this moment. Instead, a deep and glacial numbness spread from the center of my chest, freezing my blood, paralyzing my vocal cords. My husband, my best friend. The two people who held the blueprints to my soul were currently dismantling it in the dark, laughing at my blindness. Every shared glance, every late-night office excuse, every time Vanessa had held my hand and told me my marriage was just going through a normal phase, it all crashed down on me with the weight of a collapsing building. I was the punchline to a cruel joke they had been telling for God knows how long. A physical wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to bite down on the inside of my cheek to keep from gagging. The metallic taste of my own blood grounded me, a sharp sting of reality cutting through the nightmare. If I opened this door, I would be the hysterical, broken wife, and I would give them the power of my immediate devastation. I would ruin my own 30th birthday, and tomorrow, Elise and the rest of Ashford media would whisper about Maya Lin's public humiliation. I slowly released the brass doorknob, my fingers slick with cold sweat. I took one agonizing step backward into the muted corridor, then another. I didn't make a single sound. The shadows of the hallway swallowed me whole as I turned my back on the study, leaving the door exactly as I had found it. The tears hadn't come yet. The shock was too absolute, too profound. I was a ghost haunting my own life. I made it to the guest powder room near the foyer before my lungs finally remembered how to draw oxygen. I locked the door and sank against it, letting the heavy mahogany support my weight. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to interlock my fingers and press them hard against my sternum just to keep myself anchored to the floor. I did not cry. The betrayal was too immense, too absolute for tears. Crying was for misunderstandings, for arguments, for bruised egos. What I had just witnessed in the study was the complete demolition of my reality. Tears felt entirely inadequate. Instead, a terrifying, absolute clarity washed over me, cold and sharp as cracked ice. I pushed myself away from the door and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked exactly the same, but the soul behind her dark eyes had fundamentally shifted. I turned on the cold water, pressing a damp linen towel to my pulse points until the roaring in my ears subsided. I smoothed the silver silk of my dress. I reached into my clutch and bypassed my usual soft pink gloss, pulling out a different lipstick, a deep, bruised crimson. I applied it with surgical precision. It felt less like makeup and more like war paint. When I unlocked the door and stepped back into the pulsating heart of the penthouse, the jazz band was playing a lively, upbeat tempo. The clinking of crystal and the hum of privileged laughter washed over me. I snagged a fresh flute of champagne from a passing tray and positioned myself near the center of the room, waiting. It took them exactly 12 minutes to emerge. Julian appeared first, casually strolling out of the dimly lit hallway, expertly adjusting his left cufflink. 3 minutes later, Vanessa materialized from the opposite side of the corridor, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her emerald gown, beached her face a mask of serene composure. They were professionals at this. The realization made me want to scream, but I swallowed the jagged sound down with a sip of champagne. I waited until they naturally gravitated back toward the marble bar before I approached them. There you two are, I said, my voice projecting a warm, effortless tone that would have made the PR team at Ashford Media proud. Julian turned, his face instantly breaking into that devastating, adoring smile. Just handling a minor crisis with the catering manager, sweetheart. Someone mixed up the champagne vintages. Is that so? I murmured, stepping into his space. I consciously forced my muscles to relax, not leaning away when he placed a proprietary hand on the small of my back. You always handle the messy details behind the scenes so well, Julian. And both of you do. It's nothing, Maya, Vanessa chimed in, taking a sip from her newly acquired martini. Her eyes were bright, perhaps a fraction too wide. We just want everything to be absolutely flawless for you tonight. I turned my gaze to her, letting my eyes slowly rake over her face. I saw the faint, hastily repaired smudge of foundation near her jawline. I felt the heat of Julian's hand on my spine. I inhaled the sickeningly sweet ghost of gardenia that still clung to the air between them. You're such a dedicated friend, V, I said, my tone deliberately soft, holding her gaze a second longer than was comfortable. Always putting in the extra physical effort where it counts. Oh, by the way, your lipstick is slightly feathered at the corner. You might want to fix that before the photographer comes back around. Vanessa's hand twitched instinctively toward her mouth, a microscopic flinch of genuine panic flashing in her eyes before she forced a rigid laugh. Oh, thank you. The napkin must have caught it. Julian cleared his throat, the hand on my back suddenly feeling tense. Well, crisis averted. Should we gather everyone for the cake? Absolutely, I smiled, raising my glass to them both, the rim cold against my crimson lips. The cat-and-mouse game had officially begun, and they had no idea they were already trapped in the cage. The sharp, clear chime of a silver spoon striking crystal cut through the low hum of the penthouse. The jazz quartet faded into silence. Julian stood beside a towering three-tier cake adorned with spun sugar orchids, holding a microphone. He was the absolute picture of a devoted husband. His tuxedo immaculate once again, his Ashford Media charisma fully dialed up. If I could have everyone's attention, Julian began, his voice warm and commanding. He reached out his free hand. I stepped into his side, allowing him to wrap his arms securely around my waist. The heat of his body, once my safest refuge, now felt like the proximity of a venomous snake. 30 years ago, the world became a significantly brighter place, he continued, looking down at me with eyes that could have fooled a polygraph. And 5 years ago, I became the luckiest man alive. Maya, you are the absolute heart of this home, my rock, my partner in everything. We built this beautiful life together, and I cannot wait to see what the next decades hold for us. To my stunning wife. The crowd erupted into affectionate awes and raised their champagne flutes. Standing in the front row was Vanessa, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandelier. She actually raised a hand to dab a theatrical, teary corner of her eye. The sheer, staggering audacity of the performance almost pulled a genuine laugh from my throat. Julian handed me the microphone, stepping back slightly, expecting the usual gracious, polished hostess speech. I took the cool metal cylinder, letting the silence stretch over the room for a fraction of a second too long. Thank you, Julian, I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of the tremor that had shaken me in the hallway. And thank you all for being here. They say a truly successful life is built on transparency, trust, and surrounding yourself with people who genuinely have your back when you aren't looking. I let my gaze drift leisurely over the sea of faces, deliberately pausing and anchoring my eyes squarely on Vanessa. People like Vanessa, my oldest, dearest friend. You always joke that she is practically a third partner in our marriage, Julian, and tonight I finally understand exactly how deep that involvement goes. A ripple of light-hearted laughter washed through the clueless crowd, finding the sentiment sweet. But Vanessa's smile instantly crystallized. The manicured fingers holding her martini glass tightened until her knuckles turned stark white. Her eyes darted to Julian, then back to me, searching for the trap. You both put so much exhaustive effort into tonight, I continued, pacing slowly, and letting the microphone pick up the deliberate rhythmic cadence of my words. I know the incredible lengths you went to. The late nights in the study. The careful, intensely physical coordination behind closed doors when you thought I was too busy to notice. The hand Julian had resting on the small of my back twitched. It was a microscopic spasm of muscle, a sudden misfire of his nervous system, but I felt it. I turned my head, looking up at him, trapping his gaze. It takes a massive amount of energy to keep up such a flawless, intimate performance, I murmured, my tone deceptively soft, to make sure every little detail is perfectly hidden from the guests. I appreciate the breathless effort you both put in just minutes before this cake cutting. It left you completely exhausted, didn't it? Darling, the guests murmured in polite amusement, assuming I was referring to the stress of party planning, but the Ashford smile on Julian's face completely fractured. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a mask of stark, sudden terror. His pupils dilated as he stared down at me, the horrific realization dawning in his eyes. He knew. I turned back to the crowd, raising my glass high, a perfectly sculpted smile on my crimson lips. To the truth, I toasted, my voice ringing clear across the penthouse. However it chooses to reveal itself. The applause faded into the background noise of clinking silverware as the catering staff began distributing slices of the ruined cake. I didn't wait to taste it. Catching Julian's eye, I gave a subtle nod toward the swinging doors of the caterer's prep kitchen, a secluded and a sterile space currently empty, while the staff served the guests in the main hall. Julian's jaw was tight, a muscle ticking violently near his ear. He looked at Vanessa, who looked like she might be physically ill, her emerald gown suddenly seeming like a heavy, suffocating costume rather than a triumph. I pushed through the swinging doors. They followed a moment later, the heavy doors sealing us off from the music and laughter. The stark, fluorescent lights of the stainless steel kitchen buzzed softly, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on their pale faces. "Maya, what was that out there?" Julian demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, frantic whisper. The Ashford PR charm was entirely gone, replaced by the cornered panic of a man who realized the ground beneath him was rapidly crumbling. "Are you out of your mind? I'm making a scene like that in front of the board?" Vanessa hovered a few steps behind him, her arms wrapped defensively around her own waist. "Maya, please, you're acting strange. If this is about the late nights, we can explain—" "Explain what, exactly, V?" I interrupted, my voice entirely flat, the sound echoing off the cold metal surfaces. I slowly closed the distance between us, stopping just outside of Julian's reach. "Explain how my husband's collar was unbuttoned? Explain how your hands were tangled in his hair while he had you pinned against his mahogany desk just 15 minutes ago?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a bomb detonating in a vacuum. All the oxygen seemed to instantly vanish from the room. Julian stumbled backward as if I had physically struck him. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He opened his mouth to speak, to deploy his usual arsenal of persuasive lies, but his vocal cords failed him. Vanessa let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, a trembling hand flying up to cover her mouth. Her eyes, wide with sheer terror, filled with immediate, cowardly tears. "Maya. No, Maya, it's not. You misunderstood. Do not insult my intelligence," I cut her off, my tone dropping to a lethal, icy calm. I took another step forward, forcing her to shrink back against the industrial refrigerator. "I didn't misunderstand the door you carelessly left ajar. I didn't misunderstand the heavy, suffocating stench of your custom gardenia perfume lingering on my husband's neck while he kissed my temple in front of our friends. And I certainly didn't misunderstand the way he touched you." Julian finally found his voice, a broken, desperate rasp. "Maya, please, it meant nothing. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake." I turned my gaze slowly to him, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, hollow disgust. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning, Julian. Unbuttoning your shirt in the study while your wife hosts your colleagues in the living room is a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice you both made." The devastation on their faces was complete. There was no brilliant PR spin, no charming excuse, No gaslighting that could save them from the clinical, surgical precision of the truth. I had stripped them of their shadows, exposing the ugly, decaying core of their betrayal under the harsh, fluorescent lights. I watched them drown in their own profound shame, and for the first time all night, I finally felt like I could breathe. The fluorescent lights hummed, a stark, clinical soundtrack to the death of my marriage. Julian took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, as if trying to calm a startled animal. But I wasn't startled. I was terrifyingly lucid. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice cracking. The polished Ashford Media executive was gone, replaced by a hollow, trembling man. "We can fix this. I swear to you, we can go to counseling. I will resign. I will do whatever it takes. Just don't walk away from us." "There is no us anymore, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it felt loud enough to shatter the stainless steel appliances around us. "You didn't just break a vow tonight. You broke the entire foundation of my reality." I shifted my gaze to Vanessa. She was sobbing now, heavy, ugly tears ruining her flawless makeup, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. She looked entirely pathetic. For 15 years, I would have moved mountains to comfort her when she cried. Now, looking at her shivering in that stunning emerald gown, I felt absolutely nothing. The void where my love for her used to reside was vast, dark, and utterly cold. "I'm sorry," Vanessa choked out, unable to meet my eyes. "Maya, I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." "Things don't just happen, V," I replied, the icy calm in my voice unwavering. "You made a choice. Every time you smiled in my face, every time you drank my wine, every time you slept in my guest room while actively dismantling my life. You chose this." I looked down at my left hand. The 3-carat diamond caught the harsh kitchen light, fracturing it into sharp, blinding prisms. 5 years ago, Julian had slid it onto my finger, promising me a lifetime of absolute partnership. It had felt so grounding then, anchoring me to a man I thought was my equal. Now it felt like a heavy, suffocating shackle. Slowly, deliberately, I reached over with my right hand and gripped the platinum band. "Maya, no!" Julian gasped, lunging forward a half step, his eyes locked on my hands in sheer panic. "Don't do this. Please, not tonight." I didn't pause. The metal slid over my knuckle with a smooth, chilling finality. The skin beneath it felt suddenly bare, exposed to the cold air, a physical manifestation of my new, terrifying freedom. Next to me, on the steel prep counter, and sat a single, perfectly cut slice of my birthday cake on a white porcelain plate. It looked beautiful, rich, and entirely unappetizing. I extended my hand and let the ring drop. The heavy platinum clinked sharply against the porcelain, settling right next to the untouched sponge sugar orchid. The sound was small, but in the suffocating silence of the kitchen, it was a thunderclap. It was the sound of a contract being irrevocably severed. I didn't look at them again. I turned my back on the ruins of my marriage and the ashes of my best friendship, walking toward the heavy metal door of the service elevator. I wasn't going to walk back through the penthouse. I wasn't going to put on a brave face for the Ashford board members or pretend my heart wasn't bleeding. I was leaving them to face the music alone. They could explain to the hundreds of guests why the birthday girl had vanished. They could choke on their own lies. I pressed the call button, the metal cool under my bare finger. The doors slid open with a quiet hum. I stepped inside, turning around to face them one last time before the doors closed. Julian was staring at the ring on the plate as if it were a live explosive. Vanessa was weeping into her trembling hands. "Keep the penthouse, Julian. Keep the perfect image," I said, my voice perfectly steady, echoing in the confined space of the elevator. "And keep her. You two deserve exactly what you're going to get."